Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer. Welcome to my channel. So in the first part, I spoke a little bit about the Wainwright. I say a little bit; it was quite a long video, but I spoke about the first shortlist for the Wainwright Prize this year, which was around nature writing. And the Wainwright Prize is sort of has two separate shortlists this year, with a third for children's writing coming next year. But it focuses on different parts of nature writing, and this prize is a lot more about conservation, global conservation. And so as a result, you can imagine a lot of these books feel a lot more urgent. There is a real anger and sort of ferocity to them, but I think there's something so interesting about them as well, particularly if, like me, you are stuck in some kind of environmental sort of ennui or kind of helplessness and panic about the world. What I think is also great about these books is, as well as acknowledging the mess we're in, they also offer potential options for change. So let's have a little look at the shortlist. So the first of these that I'll mention is the winner from this year, and this is Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. Firstly, a great name. Secondly, probably the most beautiful book cover I have seen this year. I absolutely love this, and it's also got pictures at one point in the middle that also has all these other gorgeous sort of fungi and things, and it's just I don't know why I'm just here is a book, here's me showing you pictures, but it's just got all these sort of really beautiful things about the kind of the wonder of nature. And I think that's what really hit me about this book was nature is incredible. Right, and gorgeous, and that comes as no surprise that I feel that way. You may have gathered that by sort of about 47 hours of me talking about nature writing this year. Anyway, but Entangled Life talks about fungi and other kind of similar things, and how they basically play a really big role in not only our current ecosystem, but how actually they are a really big part of how the world will, how we can kind of fight various bits of climate change and sort of environmental collapse, which is good because we're in a pickle. But this book, it reads as just this man who is so absolutely passionate about a very specific topic, and in the most beautiful way. Merlin Sheldrake is just obsessed with how these things interact, and he talks a lot about how, for example, once you start really drilling down into into the soil and you look at the kind of the finest elements of plant roots, for example, they will have these sort of various fungi or mycelium or other kind of things connected to them, and how there's this sort of symbiosis between them, that, for example, the plant provides the kind of the access to the sun and all those other things that the little roots towards the bottom might need, but also these little fungi are able to kind of go down, and these little roots are able to find water and find other nutrients for this plant. So there's this kind of symbiosis there. But then it kind of goes a bit further, and I think what's so interesting about this book is it starts then looking at how humans, without us realizing, have this interaction with them. So he talks a lot at first about how smaller creatures like ants and various insects have this kind of relationship with various fungi. So for some of them, it might be that they have a kind of form of lichen or something that attaches to them that helps keep the bug warm or safe in some other way, or give them nutrients, and the bug in the sort of in response gives something else. It's also sort of found that, for example, bees might be drawn towards certain flowers that have had certain sort of fungi or whatever else kind of going on under the surface. And that at first sort of seems a bit strange, like why would this be the case? But actually there is, again, this kind of interconnectedness of the world. And so I just think this book is just so, it reads as like this passion project of this one man, but in a way where you're like, this is brilliant. Like, this man just really deeply cares about the natural world and about these very sort of specific tiny things that for the most part are kind of invisible to the naked eye. Various lichen are kind of there as well, and he talks about how, for example, they can survive radiation that would kill us, but these little lichen just chilling out, having a great little time, surviving everything, and will outlive us probably. But he also talks about how that is actually how we may also start to combat things around climate change, that actually protecting the biodiversity of our land, kind of like with the James Rebank's book that I mentioned in the previous video, means that we are in a situation where we are supporting life on Earth. Whereas actually, if we follow kind of monocultural practices around various plants and what have you, we run the risk of also suffocating other life. So this is, I mean, I totally see why this book won. Part of me is actually confused. Part of me feels like actually James Rebank's book and this belong in the other category and would be the winner of the other category, but I don't really care. They're both brilliant, so check them out. Going through the rest of these authors alphabetically, again presents this really interesting source of all of these other ways that we would combat climate change. And the first of these is David Attenborough, the man, the legend, the wonder, A Life on Our Planet. And I mean, anyone who's grown up in the UK will be very, very familiar with his voice. He also does the audiobook for this book, which is highly recommended. But in it, he talks about his long life and essentially how nature has changed in the meantime. So at every chapter, he'll say how old he was at a certain year, what number of people there were left, but also how many species had become extinct, how many acres of forest were still left, for example. And he presents what does feel like quite a bleak future in terms of talking about how rapidly things have changed and how rapidly we are heading towards collapse and disaster. But there is also a hope to it. Again, like I'll be saying for all of these books, that kind of connectedness of life, that actually, yes, we may be cutting down trees and not necessarily thinking about it. Cutting down those trees also has this knock-on effect on all these other creatures. What effect does that have on us? We may think at first, but actually in the longer term, that really does cause issues for us. But there's something so calming about David Attenborough doing it, where you're kind of like, yes, I'm really angry, but David Attenborough is also telling me that things will be okay, so I will believe him, but we also need to take desperate action. But we should also believe him and trust him because, you know, he's David Attenborough. And it's also really funny just seeing someone of his kind of clout and sort of status, I guess, on a list like this alongside these other kind of scientists and writers and researchers. And it's brilliant because, you know, he has done so much over his life to champion real advancements in our understanding of the natural world. And this book feels like he is sort of looking back and really sort of saying, yeah, you know, but if you you know, it's great that you feel really invested in the lives of these animals that I've spoken about. Now here's what you need to do to take action. And I think that's really great as well. The next book is Cal Flynn's Islands of Abandonment, which is a book that I absolutely adored, and let me tell you why. So this book was also shortlisted for the Baillie Gifford Non-Fiction Prize, very rightly so. It's brilliant. And again, it's a book that also sort of defies sort of easy placing. So yes, it's about conservation, but it's also kind of about these sort of places of desolation and abandonment. And so in the book, Cal Flynn takes us through various parts and sort of places of the world where humans once lived and have sort of no longer live in quite the same way, and the way that nature has sort of basically started healing back and sort of taking back over in sort of sometimes quite unexpected ways. So said that very strangely. So I don't know what's happening to my accent today. So she talks about, for example, the more standard ones that you would perhaps expect. So places like Chernobyl, sort of after the kind of the nuclear sort of fallout and what the impact that had on the local community, where lots of people left, but now suddenly nature's sort of healing back. And it's meant that, for example, there are some creatures who previously wouldn't really be able to live in kind of human spaces, but have now been able to entirely thrive and take over. And how, you know, there are old abandoned villages that now, I think it was around Estonia, that as a result are now this massive kind of carbon sink. I think that's the right word. They're taking a lot of carbon out of the environment, and they are doing that because basically this vast expanse of land was just left where people used to be, and now as a result there's this great forest. And so you've got these kind of various locations like that, but also ones like Detroit in the US, where she talks about how there are these areas of land where, because of either violence or poverty or whatever else, land has been cleared or houses have sort of been taken over, and nature again has sort of reclaimed them. And this book is just so fascinating for this. So sort of not only the location she picks, and there are a really broad range of places, but also her telling of it. She sort of tells these stories of these places in very sort of quick, sweeping language. And it's so interesting because you wouldn't think about half of these places. You wouldn't put Detroit necessarily in the same sort of sentence as Chernobyl. You wouldn't necessarily think of sort of these forests, but also think of, you know, these sort of this area where basically I can't remember the name of the place in the US, but where lots of people have moved to kind of create this sort of semi-religious sort of community, all these kinds of things that are so different from what you'd expect. And I loved this book. I just thought it was so clever. And again, if Entangled Life hadn't won, I think Flyn's book, Islands of Abandonment, would have been my personal winner. Either one of them, they're both such fabulous books. But yeah, just so interesting, and I really enjoyed what this book had to say about the idea of nature sort of always being there in the background, just ready to kind of take back over. Next up, we have Rebecca Gibbs with Fathoms, The World in the Whale. And this is published by a really interesting publisher called Scribe, and they often have just really quite interesting books that they take on, and this is no exception. I was really quite blown away by this. So Fathoms is the story of just the humble whale and its role in the ecosystem, and it's fascinating because there's a lot that I didn't really realise sort of linked to that, which is that whales are just such a big part of the ecosystem. I mean, physically obviously as well, but like play such a big role in a way that we don't often understand. And there's something kind of almost mysterious about them because, you know, unlike other animals that we would either be able to keep in our homes and sort of observe a little bit more, or see in zoos or whatever, we don't really spend time with whales, at least, you know, me growing up as a South Londoner. And I think what's so fascinating is just sort of watching how she sort of unpicks the sort of various aspects of these animals, these kind of creatures, and what they mean in the world. So actually, the fact that we can often tell the health of the ocean by these whales. And something that Rebecca Gibbs does so well throughout this book is really articulate how these creatures are so important in the ecosystem. So she talks about how just the fact that they will eat various kind of creatures or plants, whatever, and kind of excrete them over here somewhere else, means that they move nutrients and move sort of various things around the ocean. There's also the fact that when they die, they release sort of certain sort of chemicals and sort of things that also have an impact on the world around them. But then what is really interesting about this book as well is Rebecca Gibbs also sort of digs into the kind of cultural things that we have around whales. So how we will, you know, in some cultures they're really revered, other cultures they're sort of revered and hunted, and you know what that actually means, and the kind of environmental impact as well of having a creature of that size sort of dying on a beach, and actually how that has a really big impact on a few other things. So it's really interesting and really well done. But she talks about how, yeah, kind of if we lose whales, we also lose a lot of real some of the things that would actually help combat climate change as well. So it's sort of seen as that they are both indicators of the health of the ocean, but also if we lose them, we are screwed. And so I think that's also something really important about this book that it does really well, is really kind of articulate some of those points. Next up is Dieter Helm's Net Zero, How We Stop Causing Climate Change. And kind of similar to, in some ways, some of the other books, and particularly the next one that I'll be speaking about, Elizabeth Kolbert's Under a White Sky. These two books actually, I think, work quite well together in sort of articulating various parts of what the world looks like. So starting with Dieter Helm's book, Net Zero, this kind of makes a kind of an economic argument. So Dieter Helm is an economist by trade, and he sort of brings in that idea of actually what are the kind of the financial things that would stop climate change. How do we change our economic policies? How do we change the way that we look at the world to stop causing climate change? And so as a result, understanding that sort of various economic systems do not need to be the way that they currently are, and that they can also be part of the problem. And it's interesting actually that I'm sort of reading this, because alongside at the moment I'm reading this book, Consumed by Arja Barber, and this actually kind of deals with some similar kind of ideas. In Arja Barber's book, she's talking a bit about the effect of the kind of the clothing industry and how the economies and kind of various policies around those have a really big impact. And in the same way, Dieter Helm's book talks about how there are solutions, but they also require certain policies to be enacted. Sometimes that might not feel like the most comfortable thing, but that's because it's a change. It's a change of a system that we might be kind of currently comfortable in, but needs to happen to make this happen. And then similarly, in Under a White Sky, Elizabeth Kolbert talks about sort of very specific creatures and parts of nature, and policies again, and things like that, that have an impact on how the climate is sort of working and is either being destroyed or is being restored. So she talks about, for example, poisoning of land through various practices. She talks about how some creatures have sort of been overfished or over kind of populated. Some have been kind of massively overhunted as well, and so we have very few of them, and how these all link in. And I think these two books together are really interesting for that, to think about actually what does this world look like once we've got these kinds of things happening. Is actually quite terrifying to kind of think about the damage that has been caused, sometimes by sort of one or two actions, and the kind of catastrophic effect that can have on the wider world. And so I think these two books are really great for that. I think as well, it kind of just brings into focus that there are natural solutions. Nature is really good at healing itself, but also that needs to be enforced in other ways. We need to have the policies and the things in place to make those things happen as well. So that is the shortlist. Those were the 6 books that were shortlisted for the Writing on Global Conservation shortlist for the Wainwright Prize. And they're just such a brilliant set of books. You know, we kind of have sort of very scientific books and books that really focus on sort of specific sort of economic and kind of policy areas. We've got books that just talk about the wonder of nature, things like Entangled Life, talking about the beauty of it, or David Attenborough's book. We've got Fathoms, talking just about whales and kind of seeing them as part of the ecosystem. And we've also got books like Islands of Abandonment that just really delves into this sort of very global outlook on sort of various things happening in a very sort of small, very small narratives. And I just thought this was such a captivating shortlist. I just loved what it had to say. And like I said at the beginning, also helped allay some of my fears around the world. We're still in a mess and we still need a lot of big change, but these books, I think, at least articulate a vision for that moving forward that I hope is sort of paid attention to. So yeah, again, a brilliant shortlist. I really urge you to check out this shortlist and the shortlist on nature writing that I put out a few days ago. Both brilliant shortlists, full of just such joy. And also do consider giving some of these as gifts to people if that's their kind of thing, if you're looking for any gift ideas. I've been Bob, the booker, chatting about books, Kelsey Prees, gushing about nature, again, Kelsey Prees, and just being a bit of a fool, again, Kelsey Prees. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.